One of them is going to be one of them is going to be in Colorado this year. So if you have an interest in conservation education, it's mostly project learning tree type stuff. Let me know and I can put you in contact with that national person. There's going to be several states that are involved, and I think that Tara was involved with one last year. Costanzo, uh, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but just to let you know that it's a really exciting time to share our world of forestry with young people. Okay, and so just to get started with this program, I guess I should first introduce myself. Today I'm representing the Society of American Foresters, and I looked it up. I've been a SAF member since 1980. I'm currently on the Colorado Wyoming SAF chapter board as an urban and community forestry / agroforestry contact. And I'm also an immediate past chair on a national community of interest group, which helps in our world to coordinate some of the presentations that occur at the national convention. And I just wanted to embarrass Valerie. I invited her to one of our board meetings yesterday, so I hope that that was fun. And then I have a great honor right now to introduce Erin Turner. She's the National Society of American Foresters Credentialing Director out of Washington, D.C. Perhaps you can at least show yourself a little bit there, Erin. She'll help and answer questions at the end if you have any. And I'm just honored that she's here today too. Also, I just wanted to mention that this is the Society of American Foresters 125th anniversary this year. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have plenty of things to share, and perhaps at some of the Arbor Days coming up in April. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the Certified Urban and Community Forester program that just was presented in 2024 and actually has been long standing. And just to let you know, a few days ago, there was the announcement for the Certified Forestry Technician certification, which has been in the works for a long time also. And it's very timely now with all the things that we have to do as foresters out there in our areas of influence. Okay, so Allison, maybe change the slide.
And I'm going to pass out some handouts that Donna wanted you all to be able to see. So just share them around. There you go, Donna.
Oh, thank you, Allison. Okay, so I'm going to be doing a lot of reading, but I also want to just give you some perspectives of why from our perspective, why we might be interested. But first of all, what are professional certification programs and what value can they bring? I think the first one is certifications are a way for professionals to showcase their knowledge and ability to perform in a specific field or area of expertise, along with agreeing to comply with standards of the professional practice. It provides our stakeholders, two stakeholders for a long-time commitment to learning. And the certification in the number 2 section here shares that it is a assessment-based certification, which means there is a exam. So then the third point is that the designation of urban and community forestry certification, you can use this as something to showcase in your world to potential employers, to your clients. So it's something that you can share once you receive the designation. It also shares continuing education courses that are open to you and perhaps more accessible because you are a certified forester in urban and community forestry with your employer, so that you can continue like today. Everyone's here probably for continuing learning experiences, but also it helps with your certifications as arborists, as municipal, or now the urban and community forestry professional, and several other of the certifications that you probably already have with ISA. So Just a note, the last point is that this doesn't supersede any local licensing laws that you may have within your state. But I wanted to kind of share that it's important and of value to me, and I'm sure to most of you, because we're probably lifelong learners. It is important to the people that I serve that they know that I am continually looking for betterment of my knowledge to share with them. And I think that that is probably one of the more important reasons. It just kind of keeps you accountable to continue your education. It's not hard to do because that's something that we seek out information so that we can give the best information to the people that we serve, which in our Colorado here and Wyoming is our citizens. Okay, so Allison, next slide. Okay, so how was the CUCF program developed? You know, it started before 2013, but in 2013, SAF entered an agreement with the California Council of Urban Forestry. They already had a certification program with the state of California. So this gave a nice template or something to jump off of to begin the process. And then in 2020, SAF had a market analysis performed, and that kind of laid the foundation. And within the market study, they determined that there was a need for some sort of certification for foresters. And one of the next steps was in 2023, although there were others, there was a response to surveys that supported what might go into the next step, which was looking toward the blueprint for an exam and evidence of qualification as a urban and community forester. So they reached out to many partners. And some of you in this audience are probably some of the folks that responded to the survey and perhaps participated in the process of creating this particular program certification. But what I want you to notice from this slide is that it's a thoughtful, detailed, incremental, and dedicated approach to reaching this certification program, which was put out in the spring of 2024. So just recently. Okay, so the next slide.
Sorry, I'm having troubleshoots my shoes here.
I'm glad that trouble's coming from your end. Allison asked if I wanted to
Not
change
you,
the slides, and I said, no, that's okay. I think I have trouble chewing gum and going at the same time, but back up one slide.
One, okay.
Okay, so I want you to notice who was involved. Some of the key players are the American Forest, the California Urban Forest Council, ISA, the state foresters, the Society of American Foresters has a certification review board. The Society of Municipal Arborists, which is now the, Urban and Community Forestry Society. I always get that wrong, sorry. I'll get it eventually. And then the SFI and the U.S. Forest Service, along with quite a few universities and some industry players. So quite a broad and deep group of folks that help put this together, which all takes time too. Okay, next slide. This gets you time to read while we're getting ready to change slides. Okay, now there's a lot of eligibility pathways to be a certified urban and community forester. And I think it's really timely right now because there has been a lot of discussion in how to get into our world of arboriculture, urban forestry, just all our arenas. We're needing more young people to kind of jump in, and also people with different levels of access that they've had to becoming what they are today in the professional world of urban and community forestry. So I want you to look at the left-hand side. The dark green is perhaps the traditional approach. You know, do you have work through academia to have a degree in forestry or related forestry disciplines like the natural resource degrees, and then also you know, other approaches. Look at the light green. Notice that we're looking toward the technical degrees. So the associate degrees can be an access. And then notice on the bottom that if you have the experience in urban and community forestry, you do not have to have a degree if you have that knowledge and learning and experience. Then look across the top. It says related degrees, so the traditional perhaps degrees, and then the unrelated degrees. So in other words, if you've gone into this field with, let's say, a biology background or something, this is allowing you access if you have the knowledge and the credentials to proceed and apply for this certification. Now, all candidates that qualify must pass the competency-based examination. And so first you have to apply. You work through the credentialing department within SAF to, you know, confirm, and you have resumes, you have perhaps certifications, and you just kind of share what you have so that they can make a decision if you qualify to enter in and take and try to take the exam. And so just look, there's a handout that you can take a picture of or go online to the Forester website and look at this more closely. But I just want to show you that there's several ways of approaching applying for this certification. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, now these are the exam overview. I have some handouts if you're interested, but you can also go online to look at what these different domains mean. But they are well thought out. Professionals in our world, in all arenas, so academia, utility, municipal, state and federal, folks got together that are people like ourselves and decided what was an urban and community forester, what are the domains that we need to know about to be qualified in what we work in. And so these are kind of the outlines. And I have to say that the exam itself, there's a few points more for this and that, but I'd say they're all pretty consistent across the board. I'll just say between 14 and 18% within each domain is the types of questions that you'll get on the exam. The exam is 150 questions. It's 3 hours, and they do give you a break every hour, so you can kind of catch your breath and then go back in and continue with the next segment of the exam. So, and like this shows, there's more information at the www.eforester.org site. Okay, so next. Okay, maintaining certification. I think there's some really great things to share about this certification. Membership to SAF is not required to earn the certification. SAF is the umbrella organization that's housing the quality and professional certification, but you can be not a member. There are benefits. If you are a member, of course, it's a little less expensive, just like ISA or some other organizations that we might be involved with. There's 45 continuing forestry education hours that are required every 3 years for recertification. And I think the exciting part is that the certification, if today's program is, I think it's called reciprocal, it counts, you can count it for both. So if you already are a certified arborist and you're here to get the 1 credit for, or 1 or 2, CEUs for today, you can also apply that by sending it in to the credentialing department at SAF and get that 1 credit or 2 credits toward your certification as an urban and community forester with SAF. Okay, so, and I look at the 45, at first I thought, that's a little more than the certified arborist. But if you're already a certified arborist and an urban forestry professional, then you already have to get 15 in one and 30 in the other. So to me, this is very similar. And it's also, you can count it toward what you're doing in ISA toward SAF. So it's already set up for you. Okay, and then if you're doing the recertification as a maintenance, it's 12 CFEs, and that's for the candidate for certification for urban community forester. And I just want to comment that I've only been a member certified since May, and I already have I have more than 15 credits already. It just, it's already something that we do anyway, to just keep up with things. Okay, so urban and community foresters wear many hats, and there are many aspects of the job that have related certifications, but I think that this is one that's very important. And there are similar certifications. Let's see. I think I'll just let you read that, but I think that it's exciting to consider that the urban and community forester with the SAF certification is very holistic, and it just is a part of what we do. So I think I like the last bullet down on the bottom. We encourage you to review the SA certification handbook to determine if the CUCF is the right fit for you. And I think I'll just kind of leave it at that, but let's look at the next slide. At this point, it's only been open since May of this year, or this last year. 13 applicants have earned their candidate for certified urban forester. 100 plus applicants have been approved to sit for the exam, and over 100 professionals have earned their certification since it began in April 24. So that I'm going to share a slide here when we're done, but let's go ahead and go to the next. Okay, so I just want to thank you for this time to present and share the opportunity with you if you're interested. And Erin Turner's online. Do you want to just say hello so that people know who you are when they...
Sure. I was starting to answer a question in the chat that I saw there about the companion book. We have a resource guide available to anyone that applies that has some sample questions and suggested references. Of course, those are just suggestions, and you can use any references that you find applicable to study for the exam, but we also provide a free practice exam. So you're able to take the practice exam on your home computer or your office computer. And that really gives you an idea, a little bit of the content of the exam, but also gets you that familiarity with Prometric, who's our exam partner. And you can test through them at any location throughout the country. You have a year of eligibility once you're approved. So you can test at a time and a location of your convenience anytime throughout that year. Okay. But Donna, if you don't mind, if I could explain very quickly, I know you touched on it, the section about the candidate. So we also have those of you who may just be getting started in the field. Maybe you don't have the required years of experience yet, but you're really passionate and you know this is where you're going with your career. So we have access for a candidate pathway where you can earn the designation of candidacy and work up to the respective years of experience required, depending on what pathway you are following. And this is where you would have to earn those 12 CEUs or CFEs annually versus the 45 every 3 years. You would recertify annually. Right now, for those who have an alternative pathway, the eligibility requirement for a candidate is 3 years, but my certification review board is really looking into the potential of changing that to be able to come in with no experience and just work up to that experience, because we've had a lot of feedback from municipalities and other companies and organizations that really are looking for that workforce. They're providing the on-the-job training, and they really want a way to help elevate their employees and give them that opportunity to grow in the field. So this is going to be investigated for 2025. So I would just recommend you keeping a lookout for that and anything else coming down the pipe. And I see, Joseph, it looks like, where can we find that free practice exam? That is after you apply and you are approved, we give you the access to the free practice exam at that point.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Does anybody else in the crowd have any questions over here on this? We really appreciate you guys presenting.
Well, I have just to throw out the money part of it. Okay, so first when you apply, I had to find my transcripts from college. That was kind of fun. But you do send in a resume, you do send in your transcripts, and any credentials that you have, like if you're a track person or an arborist, send those things in so that the review committee can look it over and see if you fit within one of these categories to apply. And then you have to pay to apply. So the application fee is $265 if you're an SAF member, $385 if you're a non-member. And then the recertifications are $135 every 3 years for SAF members and $225 if you're a non-SAF member. So, I couldn't remember, Aaron. I think when I made the application, that allowed me to take the exam, right? So I didn't have to pay at one of the Prometric places so that includes Prometric. If you have to drive somewhere though and stay overnight, then that's kind of on your own. But they do offer quite a few opportunities, and you can even take it at home, which I decided not to do because I thought, my dog would probably be barking at the mailman at the very moment that I'm supposed to be testing. But that is an option too, to just test in your own home. Okay, so just to throw those costs out. And then I did have one more slide I wanted to share if I could.
You should have permission, Donna.
Okay, let me try it. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm gonna put it in the slideshow from here. I wanted to give kudos to some of the folks in Colorado that have already become certified urban and community foresters, and in Wyoming. So just if you happen to know some of these folks, you can ask them more questions. And this was shared as, there's 100 now, but this at least shares who made the initial, the initial start of this particular program. Okay. And I don't know if I can share one other thing. Oh, let me share this. Can you see this?
Yes.
Once you go into the eForester, notice how there's quite a few subdivisions of each of these domains. So you can look and see if you feel stronger need some more reading on some of these different areas, they do give you a list of references. You do not get a certified like, for example, a study guide for the arborist. They give you a list of bibliography, things to look up. Some of them are papers and some of them are books that you probably already have on your shelf. And so that's what they're referring you to study for the exam. I don't personally, if you have been an urban forester for a while, just try the exam. And I know what it feels like to be a little scared to do that, but it's really going to be from your lifelong experiences and things that you've learned. If you're already an arborist, you're going to know some of these things. If you're already a track person, you're going to know some of these things. If you work with the public, you're already going to know some of these questions that come up. So I don't be shy about it. Okay. It's a great opportunity. And I just thank Erin. If nothing else, Freddie, can we give Erin a big hand, because she prepped me on this presentation and I don't know if I flunked or not, but Erin has been working with this credentialing for a long time. And we just want to thank her for recognizing through SAF our valuable input that we have to the forestry world in our communities and as foresters. So thank you.
Thank you, Donna and Erin. We're gonna hop right into our next presentation. Now, if you have any questions, Nick Evers is going to talk a little bit about
State of the urban forest
state
on
of
the
the
front
urban
range.
forest, front range, completing master's degree. Okay, so Nick, handing it over to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me. I'm Nick Evers. I'm with the Office of the City Forester in Denver. But today I'm going to talk about my project I created as a student of Oregon State University. They have a certificate of a graduate certificate in urban forestry that you may or may not be familiar with. Speaking of credentials, I thought a good investment, good program, and happy to talk more about it. If you're interested, or give me a call sometime. But for the class, we had to create a final project of a topic of our choosing. I chose to take a close look at urban forestry management specific to the Front Range. That's good. And just one more slide up. Sorry, PDF.
No.
Yeah, just to cool down, I wanted to talk about the intent, why I made the project, what I was hoping to get out of it. Some of the themes I compiled all the interviews into methodology of how I collected all the information about the urban forest here. Some background specific to our region and the results from talking to city foresters, a little bit of analysis and kind of next steps or what I'm thinking about would be beneficial for us moving forward. But starting with the intent, why I made the paper. So for the project, I set out to collect what I called institutional, regional, and professional knowledge, specifically about the Front Range. I really wanted to uncover what makes this region particularly unique, especially to work in and grow trees. I really wanted to talk to the professionals to see what they were thinking. Ultimately hoping to draw out trends, patterns, thoughts and concerns, potential opportunities for managers across this region.
There we go.
So I interviewed nine city foresters. I tried to get a good size distribution of small, medium, large communities, and also tried to get a good spread along the I-25 corridor. So these were my themes. I created these before the interviews. I wanted to channel all of the data I received from these city foresters into kind of an organizational way that we could break down, understand, represent, and also these themes kind of added context throughout the report, specifically to our existing constraints and concerns and environmental attributes that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then the methodology, again, 9 city foresters were interviewed. I asked each 30 questions. It was about 60-minute interviews, and it was more free-formed in nature. They didn't receive the questions in advance, more of a conversation about what was top of mind. And here I just have an example of some questions I asked, and then the associated theme. So does your planting program have specific objectives that kind of fall into prioritization and organization? What are the biggest barriers to tree survivability, to get their take on that? So that kind of fell into challenges and resilience. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to jump into some of the data I did find. This is referring to urban forest priorities. This is kind of the essential functions mentioned by each urban forester. Starting with planting, all communities had some level of a planting program, of course varied by community size, staffing, and funding. Generally, the consensus from everyone was to replace what was removed. And although most of the communities did mention falling short to some degree by not hitting target numbers, and there was also an agreement that successful planting initiatives did involve proper site preparation and sustained maintenance over the long term past establishment. Looking at protection, tree protection measures varied from no formal protection standards to city ordinances requiring tree protection. Despite this, all mentioned limitation based on staff and funding. And also all the city foresters I talked to suspected some level of damage happening from construction, from development. 2 communities I talked with had specific private property tree protection ordinances that they thought were extremely valuable. And most of the communities stated that they had outdated code or regulations or ordinances as it related to tree protection. And then quickly on maintenance, everyone stated maintenance as an essential duty of their organization, specifically for urban forest safety and quality. This was kind of emphasized through the valuable aspects of storm management. So having a maintenance program to address the urban forest lessens the impact and resulting costs related to storm damages. Soil preparation and watering was also mentioned as an important maintenance function, but to a lesser degree, and it was based on available resources and staff. While I was making the presentation, I had a chance to think about kind of the larger questions I've been thinking about as it relates to our particular region, and those would be, what does it mean to have an urban forest in a short grass prairie? How do we use traditional kind of canopy cover goals in our day-to-day management? So thinking about arbitrary 30% canopy cover goal for a community doesn't apply here. And then thinking about how we ensure we're using resources responsibly, and then how exactly are we quantifying the benefits of the trees we're planting and maintaining. So of course, it's good to start with where we are. I think we're all familiar. Short grass prairie, semi-arid desert, 10 to 20 inches of precipitation a year. It can vary greatly and fluctuate greatly throughout the year too, so it's fairly inconsistent. Most of our native vegetation is shrubby stuff, cottonwoods, smaller trees along riparian areas, not necessarily species suitable for street trees or urban context. And of course, there are extreme weather that we all deal with. Talking about the winds, the temperature fluctuations, snow and ice loads, occasional grass fires, and drought all make it a extremely tough place to grow and sustain trees. Jumping into another theme, urban forest challenges. This looked at what the city foresters were thinking about, concerned about, and prepping for. Staffing and funding. Caveat being, these interviews took place in 2022, kind of on the heels of COVID. So very interesting time as far as municipal management. So a lot of that's reflected throughout the report, but I think some of it still obviously applies today. But staffing and funding was the obvious and largest concern mentioned by all city foresters. Funding, although a concern for most of everybody, was particularly a concern for the medium and smaller communities. Staffing issues was attributed to COVID at the time, and also a lack of interest in the industry. And open vacant positions impacted most organizations' ability to expand outside of essential duties. Looking at environmental constraints, they were mainly water, weather, and EAB. So looking at water, the rising cost of water and the availability of water was a concern. And this is kind of paired with what was mentioned as unseasonably high temperatures. I was thinking about fall and winter temperatures where irrigation shut off. How do we ensure water is getting to the trees and during dry spells and hot days? Some folks mentioned the legacy of trees in non-irrigated areas, natural areas, what that means for future management. Do we invest in irrigation systems? Do we do supplemental water? Or do we let those areas maybe transition into another use? Temperature fluctuation was mentioned quite frequently about connected to tree mortality. A few foresters mentioned the 70-degree drop over the course of 2 days, both in 19 and 2020. Then, of course, our late and early season snow. So snowstorms, when the leaves are on, is detrimental, and it makes storm management much harder. Touching briefly on development, everyone mentioned an inability to keep up with development despite different levels of regulation. This was mainly attributed to the inability to accurately and routinely inspect TPZ, and also the inability to go back and look at planting quality. So I thought it was helpful for some context to take a look back at the history of different forests here. People have been planting trees and maintaining trees here for quite some time. I like these pictures. They're probably 100 or so years old, and we do have mature trees there. So 60 to 80 years before that. So these trees were cared for, watered, maintained, pruned. I thought just helpful context to know that we have placed value on trees for quite some time. And it's also a representation of, I think, successful urban forest management. Our reason and today we benefit from the existence of large canopy trees because of past efforts and investment and value. But of course, with that, I think all of us have learned some lessons from past management mistakes. I bet you know them, like the legacy of dealing with silver maples as they age and decay over time. Species diversity issues, so thinking about ash and elm, how they were overplanted. Canopy inequity, so decisions back then on where to plant trees and where not to plant trees. And then planting infrastructure. I think we've learned a lot more about what trees require, especially when being planted in kind of denser urban communities. So over the years, as we begin to focus more on the benefits of trees, I think what has become more important, but also a more difficult question, is where and how we plant trees. This kind of involves our known constraints moving forward, the changing environment, how to respond to the effects of climate change, continuing development, existing development, how do we grow trees? We have dense hardscape, resource availability, as working in a government entity, we're used to the ebbs and flows of funding, and how do we prepare for the good times and the bad times. And then competing public interests. So this is other city initiatives, bike lanes, urban density, kind of traffic-oriented design. All of this competes with the space trees required. So how are we going to deal with that moving forward? And kind of while I was making the report and talking to the city foresters, it did feel like we were in a transitionary time. What I mean by that is we're currently maintaining and benefiting from the kind of past urban forest. But in order to maintain those benefits and grow them in the future, I think we can agree we have to change some of our management styles and A lot of us are doing this now, with looking at diversity for species, planting infrastructure, how we plant trees and where, canopy and equity, so prioritizing where to put trees, stakeholders, so looking at partners we can get with to increase or improve urban forest function and benefit, and then what technology we can use to make our programs more efficient.
Right, well, okay.
And this kind of transitions into my next theme, was resiliency. So this is what urban foresters were preparing for and thinking about. And this was really often discussed as diversity. It was the most talked about in terms of resiliency, as far as preparing for the effects of climate change, lessening the effects of extreme weather, and then increasing the benefits of the urban forest. But concerns around diversity were mentioned too. Sourcing these underutilized species. So what do we do if they're not available commercially in the nurseries? Then also the inner competition between our communities about who gets what trees. But also interesting conversations about how we use these new and trial trees versus the tried and true species, how we balance that palette. And this was mentioned in regards to our shrinking palette. So if we get increasing high temperatures and sustained low temperatures, it really squishes the amount of species that can live and survive here. Looking at sustainability and maintenance, I think there are some interesting contradictions. To this point, we had a city forester mention that we should only plant what we can maintain, which certainly has its values. We had kind of an opposite opinion from a city forester saying we should utilize all available resources and maximize our planning efforts to buffer against the impacts of climate change. I think both have merit, and I think both are kind of connected to a reaction, one to resource scarcity and one towards a changing climate. So I think there's good discussion there. Then equity, all city foresters mentioned the social implications of planting and maintaining trees in our communities. So most organizations had directed efforts towards target areas of greater need. And low canopy overall was attributed to lower income areas, newer development, communities farther east on the plains, poor condition planning sites, and then the percentage of renters, they said, impacted how much canopy a neighborhood had. Next theme, urban forest organization. This looks at the guiding documents, the staffing, technology these organizations use. Referring to the documents, all foresters mention the importance of having plans for maintenance, strategic plans, greater urban forest plans, but really only the larger communities have the capacity to take those on in a kind of real way. But on the other side, all organizations mentioned that they had plans in the works, and this was 3 years ago, so likely those would have developed further. Taking a look at inventory, everyone stressed the importance of having an up-to-date inventory. The consensus was every 3 to 5 years, the inventory should be up to date. They mentioned inventory being used to track maintenance, identify high-risk trees, run metric analysis on demand. Smaller communities tended to have in-house inventory systems, and the larger communities tended to contract that work out. Interestingly, one community had a full-time inventory specialist. And then just quick on maps, everyone noted the importance of mapping for day-to-day activities and maintenance scheduling to presentations and demonstrations to the public, mentioning it as an important visual tool to show the benefits and needs of the urban forest. And finally, urban forest community. This is kind of our interaction with different partners and stakeholders and the public at large. The main interaction with the public was usually through our city websites, calls, emails, site visits, and the occasional educational planting workshops. Most cited room for improvement. There was a theme, a surprising trend of the perception of public apathy or indifference, these community foresters mentioned. And many felt that urban forests impacts were not adequately recognized by the public at large and the city as well. As far as cooperation regarding the indirect stakeholders that are work with the urban forest, city foresters mentioned either indifferential or adversarial relationship with other city agencies, examples being public works or a planning department. Some noted that these relationships were improving, but the biggest frustration always tended to be not being notified about tree-related projects. And that interactions with these other agencies often start with a conflict. So us finding out that tree has been removed, or us sending a mitigation or appraisal, and starting that conversation on tense terms. Working in silos was also mentioned, not interacting enough on a day-to-day basis. And then different agency relationships being vulnerable to staff turnover. So a forestry group could have a good relation with a public works group, but if it was through one individual, they leave, there's a chance that could break down and sever that relationship. So this was my attempt to visualize all of the conversations I had with the city foresters. You can see the community is up top and my themes on the left-hand side. The bars represent what we talked about. And it really, I think it says a lot, but it mostly says that management is really individual to the community based on specific interest and value that community has. And then with all that said, I did try to take some of that information kind of compared with peer-reviewed research and try to look at blind spots or suggestions or topic for more discussion for us. Regarding staffing and funding, we really don't have ability to change that in most cases, but we do have the ability to change how to react in those different search situations. So I was thinking of some type of contingency management plan where we're able to dial up or dial down in regards to maintaining the urban forest we have versus being aggressive and growing the urban forest, and just being able to shift gears, so to speak, between our ability to fund and staff projects. Concerning the environments, again, we don't have much control there. The big thing is anticipate water shortages. So at the start, setting trees up for success and good planters, good species, but also either us becoming irrigation experts or working with irrigation experts to really problem solve trees with the most essential resource, that being water. And then how do we work in supplemental water into our maintenance routines, I think is an important factor moving forward. As far as development, again, I think the goal is to get eyes on the tree throughout developments. That could be us through inspections, or it could be us teaming up with different divisions of departments that have the ability to get on site and then teaching them about what may be wrong in a tree protection zone. And of course, with development, getting involved early, so knowing the plan at the start, being involved throughout the process, and then following up to look at quality impacts on potential trees, and then quality control on what had been planted. Regarding survivability, it seems that survivability really depends on accountability. So how much we could set the tree up with some type of routine maintenance seemed essential to decrease mortality. Looking at diversity, we're searching for new species or underused species that survive in our current climate and may survive in our future climates. How can we leverage our buying power as a region to bring in these new species so we don't have shortages like we've seen some with pagoda tree, I think has been short the last couple of years. And then cooperation. This is our ability just to insert ourselves in the conversation, kind of being willing to kind of learn more about engineering, construction, planning, not waiting to be called, but kind of calling the folks that do make decisions about trees and inserting ourselves, but also selling the benefits of trees to others. So kind of, I called it finding our objectives and other goals. So if a transportation department is, you know, looking to do something with safer streets, how can we advocate for trees in those certain situations? And next steps, this was just my attempt to talk about what this group does here, since we're all together, and the valuable resources we have in communication. Maybe we look at bringing that online to some type of public forum. I know in my work, we're often looking for examples, people to call. So we're calling different cities. We're asking if they have examples of tree protection details or soil cells. So I thought it would be useful for us to have a local repository of information that we could search and put our wins and failures and commiserate or put solutions down in one central location. But yeah, that's it for me.
All right, well done, Nick.
Hey.
Question. When you were talking with you're talking with some of the bigger cities around Front Range, were there conversations around converting hardscapes into plantable sites, or
Yeah.
deconstructing all of that and concreting?
Yeah, it seems the larger the city was, the more, I guess, the higher the kind of view of urban forestry became. So there was conversation about removing concrete and how do we, Denver, for example, we want to increase canopy cover, but the central downtown is incredibly inhospitable to trees, especially for long-term growth. So there was that. It was mentioned in terms of investing into the planting sites and how to convince partners to really to front that money, to plant a $500 tree to spend $20,000 to rehab the site.
Right.
I have two questions. Did you gain all of this information from one 30-minute conversation with each of those communities, or you have multiple conversations?
So I talked with each city forester for an hour over using my 30 questions, and all of the pieces I tried to, or the themes I tried to compile everyone's information into some type of comprehensible format, just to pull out trends and patterns.
Okay. And then my second question was regarding the apathy and indifference. Do you think that that's just a case of the times that, most folks were the essential workers, and maybe there just wasn't the recognition that city forestry departments weren't necessarily recognized as essential?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think that time in particular, budgets were being cut, and I think people were rightly so concerned about other health and safety related issues. It's a lot of planting publicity or tree issues were pushed to the side. I did think, I don't know, myself, I take the public's appreciation for trees for granted sometimes. I think it's a tool we leverage, for great power, but I think we also have to, check in with the public to make sure that we're not pushing our values on them, that we're actually kind of reflecting their values and wants for the community.
Nick, is the PDF available to share?
Yeah, I can send that out too.
If you send it through us, we
Yeah.
Yeah,
send
we
it.
can post it to CTC's website. It's also being recorded. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, one more speaker. Cory's gonna talk. Well, let's take 5 minutes to stand up and stretch while we get set up here to just move, and then we'll be back at 30.
Good looking shirt.
All right. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming back.
Way later.
Colorado Springs Fire Department. We'll be talking about kind of fuel management and fire management Foothills settings. Us today, and I'm gonna hand it over to him. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thanks for everyone for having me today. I'm actually a trained forester. I used to work for the U.S. Forest Service and private industry kind of all over the nation, but I've been on Front Range in Colorado Springs for about 11 years now. I'm kind of new in my role. Well, I guess it's been about 4 years at the fire department, and I'm happy to be among tree nerds again. So sometimes in fire service, nobody wants to talk about trees, so, but I love to talk about trees. So basically what I'm going to talk about today is some project work that we kind of do in the Colorado Springs Wildland Urban Interface. How that interacts with some of the large scale projects that we have and then some of the interface that we have directly with homes. If you guys have any questions, I'm pretty relaxed. So if you want to interrupt me in the middle, please feel free. I've just kind of got some pictures of some of the projects and things that we have going on in our Wildland Urban Interface. And just a couple slides about explaining what we call the homing mission zone. If some of you guys are familiar with that, we call it a safety zone. You hear a lot of different terms in wildfire mitigation. But go next. Maybe.
It's gonna happen.
Hey, all right, so this is just an example of a project we just finished up this last year, Cedar Heights Fuels Mitigation Project. This area actually burned in Waldo Canyon, started right about here on the northwest side, and you actually see in the aerial imagery right there. That was a dozer line that actually helped stop the fire, but this community actually did wildfire mitigation starting in 2010. It actually saved a lot of the community within this, and the fire kind of, with resources and fire lines in there, helped us stop the fire. But the polygons around that, we work with different homeowners and land agencies. But that's another thing to mention, the Colorado Springs Fire Department, we don't actually own any land. So I'm constantly working with different our Parks Department, counties, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, to try to treat land anywhere I possibly can. Can we go back to that really quick? So the idea is actually some of this was actually treated in between the community. This is owned by Palmer Land Conservancy. And then we're trying to create this kind of horn of protection around the area. And this is mostly kind of a pinyon juniper type with oak and some mixed conifer. Next. Different types of equipment. I'm sure some of you all are aware of a lot of these. We use masticators a lot. There are all sorts of different types of masticators. What are you going to use, right? We use a lot of track chipping when we have hard accessible areas where we can only hand them and we have to drag to the chipper. It becomes very expensive pretty quickly, depending on what's going on. I love to use masticators because it's one person's on the machine and is kind of a little bit cheaper. And that all obviously drives what we can or cannot do. So a little aerial imagery, not an excessive or aggressive thin, really just trying to get a lot of that underbrush out of there. Trying to focus on our oak, mountain mahogany, premium sumac, and some of the incoming conifers that were in there. So this was that pinyon juniper. This is kind of a lot of obviously the homes right there that we're treating. We have kind of increased group heterogeneity, right? So we want scientifically, I like to joke groupie clumping, right? We want a little bit of groups, we like a little bit of clumps. And the idea, right, is from fire, stay passive on the ground if it's introduced, or if we do have crown fire, that its ability to spread from crown to crown is lessened. Another example. Right, before and after, not super aggressive in certain areas, getting some of the smaller conifers out of the way and opening, just creating groups of clumps. Another example. It's the same stuff. Right?
Do you actually just grind them off, or do you remove them, or a little both? Or?
It depends. What I can and cannot do based off landowner objectives, right? What the objectives are of the project. A lot of them were mulching or mastication, right? So we're just doing fuels modification. So basically, we're still leaving that biomass on the landscape. It actually works out pretty well in some of our drier landscapes because we don't have much soil resinization at all. We have this lovely thing called DEG, it's decayed granite, and that's about all that's there. So when we actually grind a lot of this up, usually the fuel specifications already keep less than 4 inches. When we have an increased fuel bed or we start to get over that, like 8 inches, I've seen stuff up to a foot. If fire is introduced into it, it burns really smoky, really hot, and then talk about all the fine roots of all the leaf trees that we had on the landscape, get cooked, and now we have nothing left. And then we had hydrophobic soils, compounding things really bad. 4 inches is usually my highest specs for that. And then when it kind of gets ground up, it allows for a little bit of that breakdown of that organic material and actually become an O layer and hopefully some soil, right, that we have on the landscape. This is right in town. In our wildland urban interface, Austin Bluffs project. This was pretty cool. We got to work with UCPS on the bottom left. This is all their property right here. We have Colorado Springs Utilities right here, and then a bunch of houses right here. I would have loved to treat this ridge top, but one homeowner wouldn't let me go through their property. But we try to do what we can where we can, right? But this is a direct nexus, obviously, to our wildland urban interface where we have these large open spaces, forested areas, and people's homes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
That homeowner that wouldn't let you, so there was no other options from other directions or?
Yeah, so if you see kind of right here, this is actually a ridge top. So thinking always, in fire mitigation world, we always think rivers, ridges, and roads, the 3 R's. I don't have any rivers, but I've got ridges and roads, right? But to get to this, this was super steep. So our mechanical feasibility is usually around like 35%, right? Unless I'm using tethered logging, helicopter, which I have done. But in this area, this actually wasn't developed at the time. This is a new aerial imagery, and we were trying to go through here, and they just did not like the idea of mitigation at all. Multiple conversations. These people, this community is actually really active in our chipping program and stipend programs in our wildland urban interface. Just one example of some homeowner that did not believe in it, and that's okay, right? But we continue to educate and try to have those communications with our public. So
You could have done the work, it would have been helicopter type options or something. Is that kind of?
yeah, I would have to like
It's out of budget.
helicopter drop in masticator,
yeah.
which is really expensive.
Sure.
You know, $33,000 just to turn on the blade. So yeah.
Good question. Going back to, well, that would be a good example.
Mhm.
What percentage of biomass do you leave on site and what do you haul off or what goes up in smoke?
Okay, great question. It depends right on the project. Most of the time when I'm dealing with oak, PJ, pin and juniper, or some of our brush types, I'm usually trying to do a removal or a change type in that fuel structure of about 50%. Sometimes I go a little bit harder to about 75%. Based on the scope of work or its nexus to high value infrastructure, lives at risk, and or just buildings, right? So usually I flip between that 50 to 75%, and then I kind of define what groups are going to be. So if any of you have been exposed to silviculture prescriptions in the past, the scope of work, I have to kind of write this as a designation by prescription. I can't go out there on hundreds of acres. This is the exact little, little group that we're going to leave, right? So I define what those groups kind of look like. We try to leave our older, mature oak and things like that on site. If we only have one uniform kind of height of our vegetation, then it's kind of easy, right? You just kind of create your groups and your clumps, and you usually have about twice the horizontal distance of the longest linear feature of your individual clump between your next one. And so if fire is introduced to that system, then the spread from via crown or horizontal on passive is usually easier to control and doesn't have an easy capability to spread to each. So some of these areas, you'll see it's like, man, it was a lot, little, different places here and there, and some of them are pretty stark. So this, all these projects that you've seen thus far are all mastication and track chipping, hand thinning, brush saws, a lot of laborious work. Student housing right here, we treated this as well, but this is just an example on the left. It wasn't in leaf out, but you can kind of tell the groups and clumps. Obviously, how fire is affected right here is it's how that spreads through there is obviously affected pretty well, especially our crowning and our torching indices. Yes.
So things like the envelope that regenerate real easily, how long do these conditions hold when you're going in there to?
That is a great question. So typically it's going to be 5 to 12 years. So everything is site-based, right? Or our aspect, if anyone's done forestry work on the Front Range, everything's aspect driven, right? So our ridges and our south facing slopes usually will hold from about 8 to 10 years. Our north facing slopes, if we have some good precipitation coming in the spring, summer, and I'm in there another 4 or 5 years. And this is something I have been trying to tackle in recent years with spraying. So we start mentioning spraying around urban communities, right? Here we go. But do we continue to waste, or not waste, but continue to spend millions of dollars on oak management, right? Whereas low severity fire, before we were here, before 1860, actually had a great role in creating groups and clumps and things like that. We can't use that in the middle of town. So we've been experimenting with different types of salt sprays. Obviously, a lot of people have heard about Garlon and different things, but trying to not use soil mobile chemicals and things like that. Had varying successes. I have yet to do this on a large project on city property. I've done up to 75 acres on private property in the Nexus because the homeowner wanted to try it out. And I said, heck yeah, let's do it. And it's way cheaper. And this is an ongoing project. Yes.
Is that, so Garland, you have to paint it on, so you are doing 70 acres of cutting?
Oh, no, I'm contracting that out.
Okay.
But we're talking about a difference of something like $300 per acre versus $3,500 per acre. Okay. So, I mean, we're way different as far as we're working in rocky terrain, steep terrain, but a lot of these areas have been neglected because it's been hard to do the work.
Right.
But we can't ignore them anymore. Right, so we have an out of whack ecosystem that is just not available to sustain low severity fire. So we're just trying to come up with different options and things like that. This is an ongoing project to have going on. Everything in the green is actually completed right now. We're still doing stuff down here, houses everywhere. Some of our main water right there with Colorado Springs Utility. About 40% of our drinking water actually goes through those reservoirs. So it's actually a pretty huge project for us to kind of pull off. And kind of protection for the community in general. I think this might play, I don't know. It's just a masticator if you guys haven't seen it, but I don't know if you press space, it might. Maybe.
Do you seed grasses or anything over after the mastication? Do you try to seed anything?
Yeah, so typically I'm not seeding anything unless I have like a skid trail or a logging area where we have high, or a landing area where we have high impact to soils. There I really try to scarify, and then we'll re-sow. Then we do post or pre-monitoring and post-monitoring for our invasive species. All of our machines in our project areas also have to be sprayed just to make sure we're not trying to move any of our invasive species, which we have Class A invasives everywhere. So that's always really fun. But that masticator actually, when we're using a lot of our smaller ones too, and we actually have some soil, so this Stratton, you can actually tell where he's kind of gone around and see grass everywhere. Even where that mastication head is really churny, I still see a lot of grasses, early forbs, grasses, subshrubs come back, really good response, especially in areas where we have, a stagnant canopy and no sunlight or anything's been able to hit the forest floor, or it's been choked out by scrub oak for so long. And it's pretty amazing what will come back in our early cereal response in our grasses, forbs, and subshrubs. I mean, stuff that people haven't even seen in 50 years in the Front Range are starting to show up in our project areas because the seed bed has just been dormant. So,
Do you do any sort of mitigation for erosion? I'm just curious about the topsoil that's kind of just getting tore up.
Yeah. So, I mean, so when we're kind of looking at this too, right? Even if I have to zoom in and go take you guys out on a field trip, but there's actually, so the root structure actually of the grass is actually still intact in almost all of this, where you kind of see bare soil. And usually in the spring, I mean, we get a really good pop. Now, when we start to get into some of our steeper areas or where we have less soil horizonization, and we just have that lovely decayed granite or sandstone in areas, that's where I start to worry, right? So now we don't have hardly any soil. We're almost at bedrock. And that's where we have to do mitigation action. So if I have a forested stand, sometimes I have to balance what I'm doing with soil erosion or movement and an effective fuels treatment. So sometimes I have to do contour felling, and we will essentially get rid of the tops. We'll limb and top, and we'll leave a bowl intact, and we'll kind of seat that behind a high stump. And so that kind of gives us a little bit, anchor points for if we have movement. In this project, actually, in some of the drainages where they just had to go to get some of the equipment, I didn't really like that. That's like kind of a best manager practice. No. But we anchored some of our vegetation or biomass in those ephemeral areas, basically to stop flow or give native vegetation a chance to anchor right behind it. So and then in skid trails and areas, we also reintroduce our biomass, and they'll take a bucket or rippers of like a dozer, and then we kind of slash map, and then we kind of scrape that through and kind of introduce that back in. So that also helps us get less soil compaction. So we'll get our native seed bed, and a response out of that. And that just biomass in there in general is going to just help some of our soil mitigation. Another example of Stratton. This section was actually, there's a lot of dead and dying in here, a lot of mistletoe, I'm seeing a lot of response in our ponderosa pine population for just mistletoe in general. A lot of different stressors, as a lot of things were mentioned from climate and some of our earlier presentations. It's kind of hard in certain areas, but you don't want to obviously clear cut or make large group openings where we can. But it feels like a fighting battle or a losing battle sometimes. But next, this area was actually logged in the Stratton area. And if you see on the left, this was kind of a mixed conifer stand. It was an old ponderosa pine stand, probably before 1860, ponderosa pine and grass. And due to fire inclusion, it has a higher inclusivity of white fir and Douglas fir. I love white fir for Christmas tree. It's the bane of my existence. Everything loves to chew on it, and it is not good for fire. It's regenerating really great, but it is not fire resilient. So everything in here had about every dang endemic insect and disease that we have on the Front Range. So this is where it looks a lot more aggressive, right? But we were kind of almost doing a sanitation then, right? Well, we're taking a lot of the dead and dying off of the landscape and trying to leave some of our resilient species out there.
So Douglas fir is much more resilient then?
Well, that depends. So Douglas fir is an interesting species, right? It was here, it's sometimes classified in our mesic or wet forest types, right? And sometimes classified in our dry. So it has an ability to kind of grow in a lot of different places. Historically, though, when it had an intermix of ponderosa pine, it wasn't as prevalent. It was kind of in the drainages, but in those old stands, you'll see really old Douglas fir that made it through. And if anybody's been around Douglas fir, some of those older ones, really thick bark, and those are resilient, right, in a fire adapted landscape. But their regeneration, when it comes across, I like to call it dog hair, where it's really hard to walk through and see through over 20 feet. That's where it's not so resilient as a ponderosa pine on the landscape. Just another example from understory, right? Getting a lot of some of the small stuff out of the way, a little bit of limbing up, still leaving stuff on the landscape. I'm on Pete and repeat today, guys. So Palmer Park stuff we're doing right now, right in the urban interface. Same thing. We can kind of zoom past this. Before and after, kind of aggressive, but right next to houses, right? But we're always trying to leave more of our mature trees on the landscape, and a lot of our snags, if it has nesting habitat, things like that, different biological factors in behind that. This doesn't look as aggressive, same project, but trying to get some of the underbrush, what we call the drip line, in our area, and just a lot of track chipping and things like that on that area. Same thing. All right, this is an aggressive thing. This doesn't look like it, but this is probably one of the hardest projects I've laid out in my entire career. This is over 85% slope in sections. Some of the boulders actually in between here are about the size of houses. And I couldn't see them. If you look on the left side, I could barely see 20 feet in front of me. We averaged about 1,400 stems per acre on this certain site. This is, if you're familiar with Colorado Springs, this is just north of the Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Station. And the city actually just acquired this property, and there's an area right over here called the BRC just to the north. And then the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo is right there. So we have a lot of infrastructure and things right there. This area actually burned between 1945 and 1950. And it absolutely got smoked. But what came in was my favorite tree that I mentioned earlier, white fir. But our remnant ponderosa pine, or white fir, and our Douglas fir landscape were very sickly, looked really bad. And all I could do just to kind of keep some trees on the landscape, and a lot of these still have spruce budworm. We had tussock moth go through like 7 years ago. Lots of dying, everything was just to kind of do a spacing with a 50% variability. So we did like a 30-foot spacing with a 50% variability, so they could, and then trying to leave good form, vigor, health trees, trying to. There's a lot of these that still look really bad. And then obviously you can see in the drainages, I couldn't even get stuff in there, even with the Ponzi tethered logging equipment, which is what we used for this. If you've never seen that, look it up on YouTube. It's pretty cool. But it's really expensive, but it allows us to treat some of these wildland urban interfaces that we've looked at before and said, there was no way. This is one of those ways.
Just curious, why did the city buy it? Like for mitigation purposes, or?
Trails and open space. So we have excess tabor fund in the Colorado Springs parks that is basically about acquisition of lands. And then they acquired it about a couple of years ago, and we're actually in the middle of a master plan, right, of what's going to happen on that. But I had a really unique opportunity in this area to treat this landscape kind of really holistically, or an above average treatment before kind of people have that kind of attachment. And I'm happy to do that at any time, but it did save me a lot of PR and headache and things like that. But everything that we do though is obviously fully transparent on what we're doing and things like that. And now right here, that's the direct line for the property for the Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Station. They're taking their prescription and doing it right there. So we're going to have kind of this continuity of treatment, and then the state park, Cheyenne Mountain State Park, just south of there, is treating over there as well. So we're kind of creating, this actual landscape of treatment across the landscape.
What are you doing with the wood, and what are the good ways and bad ways of communicating that with the constituents?
Good ways and bad ways. Well, I've done it all.
So is the theme of fire.
Yeah, so I always try to not use the word logging or clear cuts or things like that, right? And sometimes, obviously, that silviculture prescription is applicable to what is happening or what the stand denotes as far as prescription. So I always try to say, there's historical range of variation, right? What types of species we're making more resilient landscape, right? If we look back at fire, did it have groups and openings, and was it fully, did it look like this? Sure as heck didn't. So I always try to talk about that, try to talk about the ecology of things like that. But I do tell them that we are taking logs off. And then the first thing says, oh, you're profiting off of the forest. Well, when you have an average stand height of about 35 feet and the QMD is about 7.5 inches, you're not making any money, right? I have to pay for that hauling to go to places. Our local markets in Colorado Springs, we really don't have a lot. A lot of our stuff goes to small places like Canyon City. We go to Pueblo for pallets, things like that. I've shipped stuff to Montrose, Raton, Saratoga, even South Dakota. Just to get it off the landscape. It's ridiculous. I'm making a lot of really good friends with firewood people on the Front Range. But it's a place that we can take it, and it's a short haul, right? So it's this balance of trying to get rid of that. And this was a crazy project because every piece of land had about 4 different passes on it. We had a harvester, a forwarder to move the logs, company called Miller Timber put a massive chipper on a forwarder, and then they took all the slash from the tops of the log, masticated or chipped all of that, and then even some of the small stuff I had hand thinning and stuff go through. It was about $6,300 an acre, really expensive, but it worked really well. So And we ran fire models and stuff through this and it works really well, so.
How do you account for like potential wind throw? I'm just thinking
Yeah.
just on the other side of Mount Rosa and Lake Moraine, 10 years ago, a whole bunch of trees just fell over.
You know, that's a great thing. When I was doing a lot more restoration treatments for the US Forest Service, in Ponderosa pine, in our xeric mixed conifers and things like that, and we do kind of patch clearings and things like that, or try to do groups and clumps within that. I'll tell you what, 80-mile-an-hour wind will about take anything out. So I don't typically try to worry about it too much. I am trying to leave more pines on our landscape now, which have a deeper taproot, obviously, than some of our white fir, spruce, and things like that. So I try to do that, and that's somewhat of the species complex that we're going to leave in general. So there is a little bit of thought process into that wind throw, and then ideally, I would have loved to more group and clump this, but to lay this out, once again, going back over here, 1,500 stems per acre, I could, and I'm kind of like I was a one-man kind of team for forestry in the fire department when I was doing this, trying to lay out each individual little group at the time, and everything was really chock full of every endemic disease and insect that we have. This was kind of the best prescription I had like in my bag of tricks to kind of come up. Is it uniform? Yes. But as far as wildfire mitigation features, and we're still leaving untreated areas, obviously in our drainage and things, so it kind of gives us that heterogeneity. But wind throw is one of those things when we start opening up our forests and we have an increased change in climate. And anecdotally, I can say I've only been here 10 years, but the winds have definitely increased. And it's just becoming harder and harder to kind of tackle, but I don't have a great answer to it.
You said 1,500 trees per acre. What's the tree per acre now on the treated?
125.
You use fire also as a tool.
I cannot in the city of Colorado Springs. This is another aerial imagery, right, of kind of how close we are to houses and things like that. Now, the U.S. Forest Service, we work with the U.S. Forest Service where we have a nexus to our wildland urban interface, and obviously they can as a federal entity. The fire department actually is kind of tapped with our size with Tabor funds. If anybody is familiar with a lot of our Tabor funds, we actually are kind of small. So our, bandwidth is really just taken up with our just regular calls for health and things like that and fire. But we don't really have a section to do prescribed fire. We are really starting to try to get there, but it's going to take a long time. Yes.
I just want to feel like the Colorado State Forest Service. You talked a bit about your collaboration with them on Woodland Park and like funding some of these projects.
Yeah.
And also, have you started working with Logic yet?
Another faces. No, you're fine. So yes, so interesting kind of back when you showed our slide earlier, like funding, there was like a really uptick for Colorado. Has a Tabor initiative that was set to the side. It was $20 million about 4 years ago. We're only allowed to use 5% of that per year, which roughly is $1 million a year, and I get about $600,000 to $800,000 to do a lot of forestry work on our properties. Now, not only do I do that, but then I use obviously grants. So Colorado State Forest Service, FEMA grants, BRIC grants, HMGP, you name it. I've probably tried to write it with varying success. But the Colorado State Forest Service has been great in general, especially out of the Woodland Park office, of us proposing our projects, what we're doing on the landscape, and approving work to be done through the grant process. So usually that's a 50%. So say I have 100 acres. We propose, if it goes through for the furworm grant, please remind me of that acronym. Forest
Resilience Wildfire. Wildfire.
Something like that, right? But it's kind of it's a 1-for-1, right? So it's a 50-50. So it's really great in areas maybe on the Front Range where you have a social vulnerability index, or basically don't have as well-to-do area, or just doesn't have a lot of money. Sometimes that can even go down to 25% as far as your match. So
Just in the respective time, we are at 11.
Yes.
I think we needs to bail.
Go for it, yeah.
Go for it. We have CEUs up front here in the pen, and then retrieving. We'll just throw those passes around, but just want to say this has been really, really informative, great.
Yeah.
Really appreciate this presentation. We can keep going a little bit. Got time, but
I've got time. Sorry to go over it. Didn't mean to.
Oh,
Um,
Yeah, it was great.
Questions is not your fault.
And to answer your question, no, we haven't started budget. It's going out for bid actually in like 2 weeks. So the earliest it could probably start is in March. So this is in the northwest section of Colorado Springs, right next to the Air Force Academy. But yeah, they're a different area, and this is laid out by feasibility. Yes.
How do we get this area of the foothills to start implementing this kind of model?
So it's always going to be different for each community, right? So funding, right? I just told you I had $20 million. Okay, well, we don't have $20 million. But I think that the wildfire mitigation section, the reason I'm kind of in a weird spot with, we've had a wildfire mitigation section for 23 years. We were kind of often ahead of a lot of the nation as far as, just having that engagement with the community. We work with 143 different HOAs and neighborhoods. Each one of those has a representative, and we have a meeting with each one of those once or twice a year. So we're talking about community engagement, right? So grassroots kind of things. I'm a huge believer in communication and transparency to the public. Without that, I would not have the social equity to pull off a lot of this. So I think if it comes a lot with just a lot of education first, and then it kind of goes back. So what entities are we working with? State foresters, great option. Federal entities, partners, they have a lot of different types of funds and things that if you're adjacent to their lands, a lot of different types of funds and grants. I'm happy to take questions on any of that. And then the municipalities, region level, right? There's lots more out there, and LA is a perfect example, right? But we have a lot of power and momentum right now, especially in the Western United States, in funding that's going to be coming down, and it's not going to stop to do a lot of this work. But I really ask that if you are interested in doing some of this work or things like that, feel free to reach out. But the state entities, the federal entities, and then obviously some of your region or your city entities sometimes have money, or they may not even think about it. And sometimes it just comes with having the conversation and kind of creating risk map of like, hey, this is like really bad right here. And we always talk in fire, it's a matter of when, not if, right? We know it's going to be introduced some way, whether it's anthropogenic or from humans, or if we have a lightning storm or something like that. So, sorry to take everybody's time. These are just examples that we've had fires in our urban interface, but things that work really well. If you're working around houses, really recommend having zero escape around the first 1 to 3 feet. This is an example of a grass fire that ripped really quickly. Somebody let off a model rocket and it stopped it immediately. It worked really well because it doesn't burn. And kind of pine needles, leaves, grasses, less than 4 inches. Also, notice how that was a similar spec to my scope of work, right, for our mulching or our mastication specs. So next. And then, so fire resistant plants. So this is another great thing where we're talking about climate change and what do we have resilient plants on our landscape, right? Well, we might be drying out in some of our models in different areas, or we're getting individual precipitous events at large amounts. Sometimes our like junipers and things like that are really good at hanging on, but that is a double-edged sword when it comes to putting it right next to your house, right? I have a higher oil and resin content. It doesn't mean you can't have conifers next to your house. We have things that we call character trees. In our definition, that's just a tree that has a diameter greater than 12 inches or gamble oak greater than 5 inches. We just ask that you try to limit away, right? So we don't want that connectivity to the house. This is an example of 15 feet away from the house. Did you get rid of all your risk? No. Did you lessen some of your risk? Yes. So it's all dependent on what you want. Obviously, no means no. And this is an example of something Dennis Will did, a city forester in 2017. Not even a crazy treatment, just kind of limbed up some of these trees, got some of the oak out of there. But a fire ripped through here, just about 100 yards over here is about 250 homes. We stopped it perfectly, didn't even torch the trees, went right through it. An example of success of concept. Maybe I just have this extra in here. And then for arborists and things like that that are working in the wildland urban interface next to homes, you'll hear different types of terms. We call it a safety zone. It's our first 30 feet or till your property line, or a home ignition zone is more like the federally accepted terms. So we have 0 to 5 feet, and our 5 to 30, and then our 30 and out. Obviously, the aggressiveness of your management of your fuels and types of vegetation in that first 5 feet. Obviously, I don't like much there, but deciduous species and things like that are usually not too bad, except for oak. Oak is kind of special in that regard. And then 5 to 30 feet, right? Maybe we can still have vegetation, but groups and clumps, right? I was talking about. So we're lessening the spread or rate of the fire to the house, so that gives us time as resources, time for you to evacuate, and a lessened chance of that connecting to your house. And then out here, obviously, you can still have whatever you want, but obviously a little less is always better.
Will you define, for a group of foresters and you being fire, will you define Louis? Because I think that forestry and fire have different definitions of it. And I think it's been a really hard message to get everywhere.
Yes, there's been tons of papers just on this. So I like to, when I do the presentations, I basically say that the wildland urban interface is basically an undeveloped area that has vegetation that is burnable and is juxtaposed or right next to or abutting up to developed areas. That's pretty much all, and you can kind of twist that however you want. There's all sorts of different definitions. That's kind of how I define it. But it's just essentially we have this intermingling or like play within homes and communities, infrastructure, and an area that's undeveloped that has vegetation that can. And that's it. So answered a lot of questions, but yeah, if you have anything, feel free to reach out.
Folks online, if you didn't see my message, if you want CEUs, please put your name and your cert number in the chat. Submit that to ISA.
All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate everybody coming today. See you the next one.